What's up, and welcome back to the Marnie on the Move podcast YouTube channel. I'm your host, Marnie Salop, and this is a Marnie on the Move production. It has been an action-packed few days, to say the least. This weekend, I raced the IRONMAN 70.3 New York in Jones Beach in a tropical storm. The weather was absolutely insane. But before we get into the race, I want to say that my race weekend started with a live podcast talk with the race director, Corey Roberts, at the Ironman Village and Expo, which was awesome. And you can watch that here on YouTube. But today, I really want to talk about this race, the insane weather, the mantras that I used to persevere and get through the race, as well as some key lessons and takeaways that I learned while racing, and what I would do differently next year, because I'm definitely signing up. And you know the weather could be the same, and it also could be worse. So what are you going to do? You need to be prepared for these kinds of things. And of course, I'm going to do a little bit of a race debrief about my specific race. Let's get into it. So you know that expression, sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't. And I know it's really about a chocolate bar, but honestly, I felt like a nut. I really did. When I got into my car on Saturday morning and drove to Jones Beach with my relay partner, Sarah Dimmick, who was doing the swim, I literally felt like we were two very insane people joining another group of people who were equally crazy. Pulled into the transition area in Jones Beach, and athletes were picking up their bikes. They were leaving. A lot of them. And that was the first mental psych out. It was kind of terrifying to see all these people leaving, questioning our sanity, whether or not we should do this. It was very dangerous conditions, but nope, not us. Sarah and I were on board, ready to weather the storm with the 3,500 athletes that were also doing this race. We were going down with the Titanic. This race is one for the history books. You know when you're growing up and your grandparents tell you how they walked to school in the snow with no shoes and it was hard and they had a hard life? Well, this race was kind of like that. It's going to be one of those things that for the rest of my life I'm going to talk about, and you guys are going to have to deal with that, because honestly, it was the hardest thing I've ever done, and I'm sure there will be harder things, but I think I've got some serious bragging rights, and I earned all the merch. The medal, the hat, the t-shirt, the coffee mug, all of it, the bike kit. It was game-changing, it was life-changing. And yeah, Corey Roberts, the race director, he talks about this in his race briefings. He talked about how going into it, we saw what the weather was going to be, we knew what was going to happen, and that this would be a very challenging race, that we were, that we could opt out and that nobody would judge us, that we entered this event at our own safety, at our own risk, and he really put the ball in our court. He also said that it was going to be one for the history books, and he was definitely right. And he worked 8 years to bring this race to fruition, so cheers to Corey for making Ironman 70.3 history with this race. When we arrived at the beach, the wind was 20 miles per hour with big gusts, probably about 30, 40 miles an hour, from the northeast. The waves were huge, there was a lot of chop on the water, and it looked gnarly. They shortened the swim to 750 meters instead of 1.2 miles, and it was still really gnarly for the athletes that did that. I have to say, if it wasn't for Sarah, I would have never started this race, because I took one look at the water and I was like, Sarah, good luck. I was so glad that wasn't me. But I was equally nervous for the bike, but I definitely would have never done it not as a relay. In theory, this is the perfect course, right? I mean, the swim, it's a beautiful bay. It's not too deep. It's not too scary if you're not a big fan of swimming. It's pretty mellow, quote unquote. And the bike is flat. It's beautiful all the way out. on the Wantagh Parkway. You ride over beautiful bridges in between the ocean and the bay. It's gorgeous. It's a gorgeous course. It's flat. You could totally PR on the bike and the run. The run is gorgeous. Also takes place on the boardwalk in Jones Beach. You run along the ocean, the most beautiful beaches in the Northeast. But when it's raining and it's windy and it's cold, it sucks. It's no joke and it's not fun. But you can see in my Instagram videos from the days before when I was training what it looks like when it's not gnarly. I have so many mantras and so many thoughts that were going through my mind on race morning, while Sarah was swimming, while I was on the bike, while I was on the run. And, I really came to the realization that I could do hard things. And so you can do hard things. You can. You just need to mentally wrap your head around them. And that was like the first mantra for me of the morning, was that I could do it, that I could do hard things. I was super confident in my cycling skills and I was ready, sort of. Anything is possible, right? I mean, that's the Ironman tagline. And it is true, but it's just like, at what cost mentally? So I kept telling myself, you got this, you can do hard things, and anything is possible. And that was kind of like the positive mantras that going through my mind. But then there were the other things, like, you are insane, this is crazy, you are out of your mind. I really wish they would have shortened the bike, because it would have been easier mentally and physically for me to have a shorter bike and get out on the run earlier, because I knew that the wind was going to get stronger and I knew how long it would take me to bike a 56-mile course. So I was nervous. I wasn't nervous about doing the mileage on the bike course. I was more nervous about what it was going to be like on the run. But anyway, I felt like if I didn't do it, I was a chicken. That was literally what I felt like. Like, there was no doubt in my mind that I wasn't going to get out there and do that, because I would feel like a chicken for the rest of my life. And, hey, everybody has a little bit of an ego, and, that might not have been the smartest decision, but it was how I roll. It was soul crushing to have to make that decision to race or not to race, because I trained for it, I signed up for it, I was excited about it. It was a big event. It was the inaugural event. So many things about it that it was hard to say, like, no, I'm not going to do it. And Ironman left the ball in our court, which I totally understand. It's just like, as an athlete, you need to make a smart decision, what feels safe for you. And I think, it was hard. That was definitely the hardest decision of the day, was whether I start. And I think it was hard for Sarah too, but we knew we wanted to do this race. The next thing that came up, and this was honestly all the time, do you need to quit or do you want to quit? And both of those things are a-okay, depending on what your goals are in any given situation or race. This came up a lot. It was honestly probably every hour I thought about that, because the race was hard and mentally challenging, not physically as much, but yeah, do you want to quit or do you need to quit? And both of those things are okay. Like, it's okay to want to quit because you've had enough of something, and it's okay to need to quit. And I had to tell myself that, because again, back to my theory of being a chicken. If it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. This was how I got out of the chicken negative spiral. I kept telling myself, you can do it. You got this. If it doesn't kill you, it will make you stronger. And I certainly didn't want to die out there. So I knew when I finished that I would be stronger. And I have to say that I feel a lot stronger today. Trust your training was another thing that I kept thinking about, but it really wasn't the biggest thing, because I always trust my training. I knew I was ready for the distance. It was just the weather. I didn't train for that, because honestly, who is going to voluntarily go out in the rain and run in the wind, in 24 miles an hour wind, or even ride in those kind of conditions? Like, no one wants to train for that. But I think you kind of have to. I mean, I don't even want to walk my dogs in that kind of weather. So many mental tests took place, and physically the mental was also hard. So It was definitely a challenging race. It was a great day because I finished, and I also learned a ton of valuable information about training in those conditions and racing in those conditions. So if I do it next year, I have a lot more insight into what I would do differently and what I would do the same. And also, like, if the weather is the same, which it totally could be, then I definitely need to change a few things. So some of the biggest lessons and key takeaways I took from Saturday and this IRONMAN 70.3 New York in Jones Beach are that you really need to take a challenge and turn it into an opportunity. That is the first mental lesson that I got from this race. I needed to have a positive attitude, and I needed to turn this challenge into an opportunity. And that's exactly what I did. That's how I started. I knew that it was going to be hard. The weather wasn't great, the wind wasn't great, but speaking of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, that was the opportunity. It was an opportunity to level up, to see what I was made of, to take everything I had, all of my years of cycling and running, and see what I could do on this day in these conditions in this weather. And that's exactly how I got through this, honestly. It was just turning it into an opportunity to be a stronger, better athlete and human. And I think with any situation, whether you're doing the New York City Marathon, whether you're doing a triathlon, whatever it is, you've got to find the opportunity in the challenges. And it's not going to be easy, but nobody signs up to do easy things. We get to do this. We don't have to do this. We get to do this. At no point during this race did I think any of it was fun, but in retrospect, it was awesome. The other lesson, there are so many, but you have to train in bad weather. So next time you have a run scheduled or a ride scheduled or swim, and it's raining or windy or 100 degrees out, you've got to do that training session, because those are the sessions that are the most important. It's not so much like doing the distance or being able to run on a perfect day or ride on a perfect day. It's about riding in horrible weather, because when you invest all of your time, money, training, your heart, your passion into a race, when you get there on race day and the weather is crap, you're going to want to perform. And you want to have a positive, good experience. You don't want to fall apart. And if you train for it and you're prepared for it, you're in a way better position. And I wasn't, and I don't think anybody was. And everybody, a lot of people finished, and it is what it is. But I would now say that I am trained for those kind of conditions. I don't need to go out every single time in that kind of weather, but I certainly know how to race in this kind of weather now. And I did level up. That was the second most valuable lesson for me on this day, was just really rethinking my training, because I am a fair weather athlete, and a lot of the time I will bail on a run in the rain. I won't go out if it's windy on the bike. I'll turn around, but I'll never do that again. Having a positive attitude. This is another lesson that I take from this day. I don't know that I had a positive attitude. I think I was a little bit freaking out, nervous, and definitely catastrophizing. What if this happens? What if that happens? I had no idea if I could ride in a crosswind. I've never been in a crosswind. I usually turn around. When we were in Kona, I rode on the Queen K, and it was pretty windy. Actually, not as windy as it was on Saturday, but I definitely turned around in a crosswind because I was nervous. So yeah, I really, needed to reframe my mindset and attitude. And I, again, went back to that whole, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. And I did trust my training in terms of the distance. So I think having a positive attitude made a big difference. I was laughing a lot and smiling primarily because I could not believe that I was actually doing this, and it was pretty much hysterical that we all opted in, the entire triathlon community that raced, to do something insane, ridiculous. I know I use that word a lot. It was, there's no other word. But yeah, having a positive attitude really is a game changer. Even if you can laugh at what's happening, I mean, that's just great. Another big lesson was like, you have to do you. And that's hard, right? Because you have to do what's safe for you. You have to do what works for you and where your comfort levels are. So, if you don't feel safe doing a swim or a bike or a run in certain conditions, like, don't do it. Don't put yourself in danger. There's nothing more important than your life. And yeah, so you got to do you. And I did me, honestly. That's what I did. So now let's dive into my race debrief and how it went for me, because there are a lot of pros and cons. It was a tough day mentally. It was a tough day mentally. So specifically for me, and to be clear, this was not a race. When I got there, I knew that I needed to be smart and safe on the bike. I knew a lot of things about my bike and I have a lot of good technical skills. So I decided that morning that I was not going to race, that I was going to do it as a training event and more as a metric of survival. Like, could I survive and thrive and come out strong in these conditions? And, it really wasn't about racing. I mean, leading into the week, yeah, it was about racing. This course is a PR maker. I mean, it's flat, it's fast. I had all the plans to do my quickest bike, my quickest run after a bike, my fastest triathlon, even as a relay. But some of the best made plans don't happen. Anyway, it really was an opportunity for me to level up my cycling skills and establish a new threshold for weather. Despite the weather and all the tough conditions, I nailed it when it came to my training and nutrition. I felt super strong on the bike, even though it was hard pedaling into the wind. I felt confident in my handling skills, even though I was white knuckling it and hanging on for my life and trying to keep the wheels straight, trying not to brake. I got some seriously awesome advice going into this event that I kind of thought about at the last minute, reaching out to a friend of mine, Anne-Marie Miller, who is a pro cyclist and coach here in New York City. And she gave me some really awesome tips, which I think made a big difference in how I did the bike. Anne-Marie told me to focus on my cadence and not to focus on my power, not to look at my speed, because all of those things would psych me out mentally. And also, they're not valuable because it was so windy and it was, back and forth, windy on, windy off, tailwind, all those things. So looking at my cadence helped me not think about how much power I was putting out and not putting out too much power, but just being able to keep moving all the time. So that was really helpful. And of course, I checked in on my heart rate, which was zone 2, zone 3. Normally I would race in zone 3, but I was just playing it safe and trying to get to the finish of the bike. In theory, on this kind of course, I would overbike, which is what I did at Muscle Man this year. I didn't look at my power. I didn't look at my cadence. I was looking at my speed, and I was enjoying the beautiful Muscle Man 70.3 course, which is not even as flat as this one. Muscle Man, I think, is 1,600, and this was like 700. Anyway, it was the perfect course to overbike, but that's not what happened. Another thing I paid attention to, and this was just from my own sort of like gut instincts of being a windsurfer since I'm 16 years old, was that I looked at the trees, because if you look at the trees, you can see where the wind is blowing from. And then if you look at the trees, you can see far ahead enough to know how other cyclists are being moved by the wind. And so this was really helpful for me to kind of know when to get out of my, TT aero position and move into a different position where I was more stable on the bike. It was also super helpful to just know like what I was in for ahead. Proud of myself for even thinking of it, but I just went into like survival mode. The other great advice I got from Anne-Marie, which I had no idea because I have carbon wheels and rim brakes, and I haven't really been riding my carbon wheels that long in the rain. And she told me that I would have no brakes. So basically what that means is that I have to pump my brakes, not slam on my brakes. So I really thought about that when I was riding, because in triathlon you have to take 6 bikes apart anyway, but that really wasn't what was happening. So I just made sure to stay away from other cyclists and not really use my brakes if I didn't need to. About 18 miles into the bike, I started to feel like my shoes were full of water. Like they were submerged in 2 giant puddles, or like I was wearing a wetsuit on my feet. The water was warm, so I thought it was fine, but I did start to think about possibly going into hypothermic shock, just because if your feet are in cold water, your feet and your hands are where you get heat and cold, and I thought that might be potentially dangerous. So I tried to get off my bike, pull over, shake out the water, but I couldn't really feel my fingers. So I just like shook out my shoes. I couldn't even unzip them or anything. And so I just got back on my bike, because as soon as you stop moving, you start to feel the cold. And I was drenched, soaking wet, all those things. And the rain was crazy. It shifted all along the course. So one of the things I think I did that was super smart was not dress like a triathlete, but I dressed like a cyclist. So I wore my Castelli Rain or Shine cycling pants that are really warm, and they also have a wind and rain cover on the outside. And I wore my running shorts underneath, but they got drenched. I also wore my cycling short jersey along with sleeves, and then a rain jacket with warm sort of coverage on the inside, also by Castelli, part of their Rain or Shine line. So I'm super psyched to have had that sort of heads up thought about the race, and threw in all my warm clothes. I also wore clear glasses, which I think was super beneficial, even though I couldn't see barely anything anyway, but it was better than having dark glasses. It was also really hard to get food out of my, bike box and out of my jersey, but I managed to do it, and I even pulled over a few times, which I would never do in a triathlon, to get the food out, because I knew the nutrition was super important. And I'm super psyched to say that for the first time in many years, I actually nailed my nutrition and was great on the run. But anyway, back to getting off the bike. I got into transition and I ripped off all of my clothes. I was drenched. I was soaking wet and I couldn't feel my fingers. So I grabbed my phone. I tried to text Sarah, my relay partner, to let her know that I was off the bike and that I was going to go off on the run, but that I couldn't feel my fingers. And she said, like, just go, run, and maybe you'll warm up. But I was freezing, absolutely freezing. So, I mean, what was I going to do? Not try to run? So, of course, I tried to run. Freezing, I tried to run. So, I took everything off except for the bike jacket, which was drenched. And I think I should have left it, and maybe, in hindsight, and next year I would have a dry bag, right, for all of my run stuff, and I would have a second jacket in there. Also, transition is part of the race, so you're not supposed to be in there for like 30 minutes changing, having espresso, or doing any of the kinds of things that I do in transition. But it was a relay, and they'd already kind of shortened the swim. The weather was awful. I wasn't racing. So I kind of just wanted to have a strong and remotely enjoyable situation, and I would do that again. Anyway, I started to run and I felt great. I felt amazing. I mean, I was cold. I started to warm up. The first 3.5 miles, I had such a good pace. I was like, what's going on here? Because normally when you get off the bike, your legs are super heavy and you can barely run. But I think because I didn't overbike, because I nailed my nutrition on the bike, I was set up for success on the run. But I was cold. So I get to mile 3.5, which was the turnaround, and then you run back towards the finish line, and then you do another loop. I was running through huge, basically mini oceans / pools of water. The ground wasn't that slippery, only a few spots, and everybody was running. Like, it looked like people were just hustling through. It was super windy, and so I got to the turnaround. I think it was mile 3.5 or something in that sort of neck of the woods. And I turned around, and it was like nothing I had experienced ever. Maybe windsurfing. I have experienced this windsurfing. but when you have a sail and a board, you work with the wind to go forward. And it was cold and I was wet. And so I was basically running into a wall of wind, and the wind had picked up significantly. Like, it was 25-mile-an-hour winds at a minimum at this point, maybe 30. I looked to my right. It was beautiful. I saw the ocean. I thought the ocean was coming over the boardwalk at some point. Like, as we kept going, I definitely thought that was, it was happening, like a tsunami. I was catastrophizing, of course. But everybody looked, everybody was struggling. It was a tough race, and there were tons of runners around me. I felt strong on the run, except I was freezing. The wind was tough. I got even more cold in the wind as I was running towards mile 5. I started to get borderline hypothermic. I couldn't feel my hands. I couldn't feel my feet. I was not feeling like nauseous, but like I just felt a little disoriented, and I started to think about what the next hour would be, because I was running at a good pace, and I thought, could I do this part of the race again, or would I have to walk? And it wasn't about how my legs felt. It was more about the time I would be out there. So I was passing the finish line, the first, where you go into the finish line, and I was supposed to go on the second loop, but I took a minute, thought about what it would be like to run through the finish line, which I absolutely 100% deserved to do at that point, or what the rest of my race would be like, and if I needed to quit or if I wanted to quit. And it was really a fine line, because I felt like I could run, but I also felt freezing. And I think my judgment was clouded by my adrenaline, and I called it. I just ran into the finish line because I didn't want to suffer anymore. I felt like I had done enough. I didn't need to be like a hero. I wasn't feeling well. And of course, I am beating myself up today, but I also am really proud of myself because it was a tough decision to make, and I've never been that smart. So I think it was good that I did that. Normally I would have probably kept running and like had to go to a medical tent, and then I would have had to been like ushered back to the finish line, and I wouldn't have had that photo where I was like, yes, I finished. So I made that judgment call, and I am just like, congratulations to all the athletes that didn't mail it in, that didn't run to the finish line early, and congratulations to all the athletes that showed up and did whatever they could, like me. I definitely would do this race again. I highly recommend it. It's a great course, but you just have to be prepared for the weather. And it wasn't my first time, at an Ironman event where they did not cancel it because of a hurricane. So, it is what it is. And it was, in retrospect, a great opportunity to take my skills to another level. That's my race debrief. That's all I've got for you today. Feel free to share in the comments any fun experiences you've had doing triathlon, any extra tips you might have had for me. Be safe out there and do what you love.